Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Terry Caldwell Johnson. On behalf of the Directors Council, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's Conversations in Color, What Justice Looks Like, and our first conversation for the 2022 calendar year. We are thankful to the ITA group for their investment in this speaker series and their understanding of the need to not only create the space to engage in conversations about race, but also to create a new and different narrative aimed at creating an inclusive and more equitable Des Moines. I'd also like to thank the Greater Des Moines Partnership for co-hosting this speaker series. The 2020 murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery inspired millions to protest across the country as well as around the world. The outcomes of both trials reverberated well beyond the borders of the states of Minnesota and Georgia as justice for the killing of Floyd and Arbery was achieved. Today, we are joined by the attorneys that successfully led the George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery prosecution teams. I am thrilled to welcome to today's conversation Keith Ellison, Attorney General for the state of Minnesota, and Flynn Broady, District Attorney, Cobb Judicial Circuit in Georgia. Welcome, gentlemen.
Glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Terry. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me start out by just describing you both as the people's lawyers, who I believe represent the broad interest of not only states, but also counties and municipalities and the people that live in them. I'd like to start out today by asking both of you just to share a little bit about your personal background and your professional journey to elected leadership. And Flynn Broady, why don't we start with you on this question?
Terry, I really do like the term people's lawyer. My background starts, of course, with my parents and how they raised me. My father was a career soldier. Being exposed to that early on set the course for what I wanted to do with my life. I actually started off at Tennessee State University after graduating high school on an engineering scholarship. I left Tennessee State, joined the Army, and I would spend 26 years in the Army. And out of those 26 years, 24 of those years were in leadership position. I served in Operation Iraqi Freedom as a combat infantryman. I went to law school at Seton Hall University, School of Law, while I was in the military. I actually had an ROTC assignment, teaching ROTC, teaching leadership, and taught during the day, went to school during the evening time. After I left the military in 2008, I came here to Cobb County, started off as an assistant solicitor general. And probably my very first day in court would probably have the most impact of why I wanted to seek elected office. That very first time I went in court as a prosecutor, when I looked at the people in the courtroom, they all looked like me. And for a county that is only 25% African American, over 95% of the people in the courtroom were African American. And so I started wondering why is that the case? And as I started to look at it and see the different reasons, I knew that there had to be some changes that needed to be made. And as a regular prosecutor, I didn't have the power to make those changes. I can make all the suggestions. I could do my little part to provide justice for our minority communities, but I didn't have the power to make policy. And that's one of the things that led me to seek elected office, was to have the opportunity to set policies, to do things to make the criminal justice system more equitable, more equal for communities of color. And that's why I sought office as a district attorney.
A.G. Ellison, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, it's good to hear about District Attorney Broady's background, and I definitely appreciate your service to our country, sir. So look, we're all a product of the people who raised us. My mom was a social worker. She was from Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana. My dad was a physician, and he is originally from Sardis County, Sardis, Georgia, in Burke County, Georgia. And but then they met in the city of Detroit, and I was born and raised there along with my 5 brothers. And they raised us to serve. They raised us to help. And I'm proud to say all my brothers right now are in professions that are designed to help uplift people and help them out of their situations and to live fuller, freer, more prosperous lives. As I said, my mom was a social worker, so she taught us to contribute to community, and so we did. I grew up in the city of Detroit, as I said, and I majored in economics because I was curious about the distribution of wealth and income in our country. But then I found out that maybe it would be better to go to law school, because that way I could, really help advocate for people and really be on the front line of that fight. So I moved to Minnesota, left Detroit, moved to Minnesota, and my first job out of law school was at a big firm. They helped me pay some bills with my bar review and stuff like that. But I only stayed there for 3 years because I wanted to do more in community. So then I became the director of Legal Rights Center, which is a nonprofit indigent law office. It's like a public defender's office, and where I led a group of around 40 people to achieve greater justice. And did that for like 5 years. Then I went on to private practice for a few years, and then I ran for state legislature, not really because I ever wanted to be a politician, but because when I was at the state legislature arguing for what I thought was a bill that would achieve better justice for people, I got reactions from the legislators that I didn't think I thought they could be better informed. So I got home and I was complaining about them to my wife, and she says, well, why don't you run? And I said, you sure? And she said, yeah, if it'll stop you from complaining, man, please. And so I did run, and I did turn her living room into a campaign office, which she didn't appreciate too much, but I said, you brought it on yourself. You're the one who told me to do this. So I went to the legislature and was there for 2 terms, but then we were in the middle of the Iraq War, which I felt we never should have been in. And I'm one who believes that we should support our soldiers by, as policymakers, never putting them in a situation there's not a clear exit, there's not a clear objective. And I think that in the Iraq War, the policy people failed the soldiers and sent them into a situation that we never should have been in, should have been worked out with diplomacy. Instead, we got into this thing and we said it was weapons of mass destruction. It never was. And so I ran because I wanted to talk about this thing. And I believe what Martin Luther King said, so often, war is the enemy of the poor. The poor can't eat guns and bombs, but they need to eat food, right? And so often, particularly, we say we couldn't afford things to uplift community because of, things like that. So I ran for Congress and I accidentally won. That's true. I didn't expect to win. I was pretty sure somebody else was going to win. But I said, look, I'm going to go into this and say what I got to say. And they're going to vote for me or not. And it doesn't really matter to me. And I'm serious. I took that position and I ended up winning. So I was there for 12 years and I enjoyed serving until the position of Attorney General opened up when the incumbent decided to run for governor. So I always thought, I'd like to be in a position where I could, if I believed that some good changes needed to happen in people's lives, I could just decide to do that. In Congress, you can't do that. You can draft a bill, you can introduce it, and nobody's under any obligation to even hear your bill. And oftentimes your bill don't get heard at all. But in the Attorney General's office, if I say we're going to sue an insulin manufacturer for illegal restraint of trade, we do. We filed a lawsuit against some landlords that were abusing people in a very egregious way, we can do that. Whereas in Congress, you can pass a bill for tenants if you want to, but whether anybody enforces it, you never know. So I decided to run for AG, and it was the first time I ran statewide, and didn't know what was going to happen, but it came out okay. But I really got in there, and what I'm saying is I got in there to rebalance the economic scales, to really get in there for pharmaceutical drugs, for mortgages, for tenants, to fight the economic battle and help people get prosperity. But then we got pulled into the criminal justice stuff, and it's really, my office, I'm not sure about Georgia, but in Minnesota, it is the county attorney that is the front line on the fight for criminal prosecution. I get pulled in because they ask me to come in when there's conflicts, or when there's a rural county and the case is just too complicated for the local rural prosecutor. But normally I'm like the prosecutor of last resort. So, but we do a lot of prosecutions. You know, we did about 33 homicides last year. You know, we did about 170 some appeals. We represent people on involuntary commitments. So we have a criminal practice, but then, you know, when some historic tragic incidents occurred, local county attorney said, look, would you help me with this case? And I'm like, I can't say no. What did I run for? I'm here to help. Kind of like when District Attorney Broady, his country called him to serve, he said, I'll go and defend my nation. I think we're all doing some form of public service. So we stepped up and got involved in the Chauvin matter, and I ended up being the lead prosecutor, and then we ended up with other cases as well. And I just want to say, we really didn't see ourselves as prosecuting the police. We saw ourselves prosecuting police misconduct that would allow police officers who show up and wear the badge properly to not have to have a colleague who's doing things to dishonor that badge, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how we see the work that we were doing, and that's it.
You know, I think that everyone on this call would agree that we are so happy that both of you decided to step up and take the challenge of elected office. It's not for everyone. It's certainly not for the faint of heart, but we certainly are happy. Not only that the two of you said yes, but that the work that you do is really amplified in the results that you have achieved. So thank you both for that. That's a perfect segue to this next question. I think for everyone on this call and everyone in this country, we would agree that the names Keith Ellison and Flynn Broady will be forever linked to the names George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. I think for a lot of people, you are indeed, for us, what justice looks like, not only in terms of your color, but also how you represented yourselves in these cases. I think our audience would be really interested in learning more about how you went about assembling your legal teams, how you developed your legal strategy, and then what may have felt like the weight of the shoulders of the world being on your shoulders, what it felt like as you were moving through the trial. So why don't we start with you, AG Ellison, on this one, and then we'll go to Flynn Broady.
Well, quite honestly, I didn't feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. Okay. I'm just speaking from my own personal subjective point of view. I felt that, and I told my team many times, it's not our job to convict the defendants. It's our job to put on the case and to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. What the jury decides to do, that's what they decide to do. You know, and so we put on the best case we could. We were on the grind every single day, but I didn't allow myself to take that pressure on my shoulders, because one, it wouldn't do us any good, and two, we had enough pressure by just putting on the best case we could. There were some issues that were complicated. I mean, I think it is right for people to, you know, believe in the police department and police officers, and yet here we were asking jurors to find one guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a little bit difficult for people if you've been raised your whole life, you've gone to DARE classes, you've watched Dragnet, or, you know, on television, you know, you've been conditioned, right? So we're asking them to do something that is a little contrary to what they're used to. So we needed somebody who had a lot of experience. So we did consult with a good friend of mine who is a former assistant attorney general, but who agreed to come on to the office for this one case. And then the other one is that I talked to my whole staff, and we knew that we had a very difficult, complex medical case to put on. They wanted to say George Floyd's heart was enlarged, or he had, excited delirium, or he had stenosis, or he had meth in his system, all these things. So we knew we needed to put on a solid medical case to disprove that it was anything other than Derek Chauvin's knee and pressure on his chest and back that killed George Floyd. So I called a friend of mine in to help on that one. But the bulk of the work was done by people in my office, but we did have some special assistants on this matter. And they did a good job. We're very proud of the work that they did, but basically assembling the team was based on the needs of the case. And so that's what we did. We did use a jury consultant in this matter because we wanted to make sure that we were getting the most objectively fair jury we could. No regrets about that. But we did use a jury consultant as well. So there you go.
And Tariq, just to back on what Attorney General Ellison said, I didn't feel the weight of the world on me. And I'll tell you the reason for that, because I felt that all the things that I believed in, me as a man, as a Christian, as a father, were on trial. All those things that I had fought for as a soldier are on trial. And what I'm saying is that the things that our country is supposed to represent, all men are created equal, justice for all those things were on trial here. And for me, it was more of a focus on, let's get everybody to see this trial for what it is, and try to take away the labels, the black versus the white, take away the racial undertones, and make sure everybody understood that this was a case about right versus wrong. And for many people like myself or Attorney General Ellison, when we're in a position where we're actually prosecuting white citizens, people assume that we're just doing this for our race. No, we're doing this because we want to do what's right. And I think that was our biggest focus, is trying to make sure that people understood we were going to do it the right way. We were going to make sure that these guys got a fair trial, but we were going to prosecute them to the fullest because we owed that to the community that we were representing. And we owed it to the state, we owed it to the country, and we especially owed it to the family of Ahmaud Arbery for the loss of their son. I came onto the case relatively late because I won an election and inherited the case from the former district attorney. What happened when I did take over the case, two of the prosecutors that were working on the case left the office. One left for the U.S. Attorney's Office, and one just basically quit. So I had to assign a new lead prosecutor to the case. But I was very confident in the person I assigned, Linda Donikowski, which, she everybody knows who she is now. I was confident in her because the day I won election, literally the very next day, she was sending me updates of the case and what was going on, so to get me on board way before I came into office. So when I did come into office, I had a great knowledge of what was happening. I had seen the evidence. I had a great understanding. And when we sat down for that first strategy session, it was all about, how do we get the world to see what these men did was wrong? And that's the attitude we took from there. We didn't really use a lot of outside individuals other than our Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the GBI. We used them. The feds came and helped out because they were preparing the hate crime case. So they provided us a lot of evidence, not that we used the hate crime evidence, but just some other things that helped us to understand the mindset of these men and how we needed to attack this case, and also how we needed to understand the jury that we were going to face. Because we felt from the get-go that it was going to be an all-white jury. And so we were surprised that we actually even had one black juror because of the area that we were in and just the history of that area. One of the things I tell people all the time is that place for the minority community was over-policed. So almost every black juror that we had on the juror panels had a criminal charge somewhere in their history. And lots of times they were charged that, if you really look at it, they had no business being charged. And so those are things that we had to deal with. I wanted to make sure our attorneys on the case had a lot of diversity. And I wanted to make sure that each of them had a particular role and that the role was not, everything was not dependent on one attorney. So I made sure that we did that. Linda, Paul, and Larissa did a fantastic job. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention all the other people from our office that were on the case, whether they were victim advocates, whether they were investigators, whether they were just our admin or our communication team. They all did a great job in doing what we needed to do to make sure that we came to the conclusion that we wanted. But the most important thing for me is just knowing that the national attention that the case was garnering was to make sure that we did it right, make sure that nobody was going to be able to come back and say we railroaded these guys or did anything wrong from our perspective. And so for us, that's why we didn't use a lot of the racial undertones of the case, is to make sure that people understood this was all about right versus wrong.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you would mention that about right versus wrong. I mean, for so many people, as they were watching both of these cases, they wanted to make sure we did indeed get it right, because there were so many extenuating circumstances and so much just information being shared with the public. So I really appreciate you sharing sort of that background, because I really think it helps us all to sort of understand not only what was happening in real time, but also how to contextualize that in terms of the work that both of you were doing to make sure you did indeed get it right. So I'm going to fast forward to the verdict, because I think, like most of the people who are on the call today, we found ourselves holding our breath as we awaited the verdict in both trials. When you first heard the word guilty, what came to your mind? What emotions sort of ran through you? And, for most people in a situation like that, they want to, sort of respond in real time. But of course, you can't do that. So how do you contain yourself in that moment as you're hearing the outcome? Flynn, we'll start with you on this one.
In my case, it was a little bit different. My wife had just gave birth October 29th. And the day the verdicts were reading, she had to be readmitted to the hospital. And forgive me if I get emotional, but because I almost lost her. So while the verdicts were being read, I was holding my 3-week-old baby at the time. And I started crying. I started crying because I understood the impact. And for the first time, I had an opportunity to look at it, not as a district attorney, but as an African-American male, and the fact that the justice system worked the way it was supposed to work and found justice for an African-American male that, for all intents and purposes, they tried to destroy in the media. They tried to destroy him in court. They tried to put him on trial instead of the people that were supposed to be on trial. And as an African-American male, that's been the history that we've faced in court. Whether we were the defendant or whether we're the victim, we have always been put on trial for our past, whatever past behaviors, whatever they could find to discredit a victim, to bring some kind of light that what he did, he brought on himself. And so I was so thankful that the verdicts were guilty, and just to know that, we worked hard, we did what we had to do, we did it right. But most of all, just to know that for an African-American male, we have a point of fact that says it can work for us.
A.G. Ellison.
I actually was sitting in the courtroom, and to me, I wasn't joyous. I was a little surprised. I didn't know we were going to win until the court announced the verdicts. But I've immediately, my thoughts went to George Floyd's family, who had to watch their brother, their son, and all killed on videotape 100 times. I mean, watching the videotape was re-traumatizing them every time. And so my thought was to them, and then I do recall thinking to myself that I'm not that happy, because what it means is that somebody who swore to protect and serve did the opposite. What's the opposite of protecting and serving? Abusing and misserving? And that's not a happy occasion, right? When 12 objective people come to the conclusion that somebody was drawing a salary who would do such an awful thing to another person. And so for me, it was a sobering moment. I felt a lot of responsibility at that moment, and I wasn't jumping for joy, but I will tell you that I was very satisfied and pleased that the jury heard what we were trying to tell them. And they said, yep. I said, see, we ain't crazy. What we saw and what the people on the scene saw, they saw. And that was a gratifying moment. But for me, it just wasn't a moment to jump for joy. It was a very sober moment. I was proud of the team, very proud of the team. And I let them know that right away.
I think for those of us that experienced the ins and outs and the depths of both cases, there were so many dimensions to them both, and there were so many similarities to them both. I'm going to go to this notion of video, because I think for both cases, there is no doubt that video played a significant role. Had William Bryan not provided compelling evidence that led to his own conviction in the Ahmaud Arbery case, and if Darnella Frazier hadn't bravely recorded the murder of George Floyd at the hands of Derek Chauvin, I think we would all agree that the outcomes of these cases could have been very, very different. Let's talk for a moment about the role that the video evidence played, and had you not had that video evidence, would the outcome have been different? A.G. Ellison, we'll go to you first on this question.
Well, we constructed the case as if we didn't have any video, although we knew we did. But, people believe people, who are credible and sincere. And so we started with the people who were on the scene, just like Good Samaritans pleading for the life of a man that they didn't even know. And they cried out for his life. They cried out for them to check his pulse. They cried out for them to get off of him that way and render assistance. And as George Floyd's words got more spaced out and slower and weaker, they called for them to help him, and they didn't. So we started there, because what we wanted the jury to do is to identify with random citizens selected by chance who saw this thing, not too different from the same way they were selected. And but to answer your question directly, I really don't know what would happen if we didn't have the Darnella's video and all the other video, because the initial report from the Minneapolis Police Department was that George Floyd died of a medical emergency in police custody. A heart attack? Was a stroke? Sounds kind of generic, actually. They didn't mention anything about force. So, I don't know. And then, of course, despite the video evidence, they were trying to say that he was being violent toward them, and that really was not true, And so, thank goodness we had video, but we put on the case as if we didn't have any video. And we let the video supplement and augment as opposed to be a replacement for it. But in answer to your question, I have to say, I just don't know. I got a feeling that maybe nothing would have happened if we didn't have any video. I'm thank God that we did.
And Tari, in our case, no video, no prosecution, no case. William Roddy Bryant, he turned the video over to the officers that particular day, the day it happened. because of the connections that the defendant had, Greg McMichael, they were not going to prosecute. The district attorney had made the decision, do not arrest him. But thankful the Glenn County PD decided they were going to conduct an investigation anyway. But ultimately, it's up to the district attorney whether they actually charge someone. But they conducted the investigation. And if he does not release that video, I don't think anybody knows that Ahmaud Arbery, what actually happened. Because in my case, there were no witnesses. The only witnesses were the defendants themselves. And the story that they told to the police department was self-serving. They wanted to make sure that they let the police department know that they felt threatened, that they felt that this man was doing something he shouldn't have been doing, and that they had a reason to go after him. I mean, they even told the police department after the thing, well, we know he did something. Y'all need to check with the other neighbors to see what he did. But without that video to see the egregiousness of their actions, there is no case. And for them to actually release the video thinking it was going to basically let the world know that they weren't guilty because it was what they thought was self-defense, just tells me that, they really figured that what they did was right. And it's sad that we have people that think they can do what they did. So without that video, we don't have a case. We never hear what's happening. And thankful for Miss Wanda Cooper Jones, Ahmaud's mom, who kept saying, this is not my son. I know he didn't do this. What's going on? Because initially they lied to her. They told her that her son had broken into a house and was killed by the homeowner. That's what they told her. And she knew that was not her son. And it was not, if not for her steadfastness and seeking justice, this doesn't happen, because it was her pressure that forced Greg McMichael to actually release the video thinking it was going to exonerate them. But instead, it started the furor for seeking justice, especially since, the video came out right after the George Floyd killing. And so people wanted justice. And I'm so glad that they released the video so that we could seek and find justice.
It's interesting because the role that video played in these cases was significant, but we've also had video in other cases where the outcome has not been the same. We can think about, we didn't have video evidence of Emmett Till, but we certainly had photographic evidence of the graphic nature in which he was brutalized. But, you think about Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice. There are so many things about these cases that bear a resemblance to the George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery cases, but they all had very different outcomes, very different outcomes. Was there ever a time, as you were going through all of the evidence and actually trying the cases, was there ever a time where you thought you might lose the case? There's always that possibility, but was there ever a time that you were like, ooh, this isn't feeling good, or, oh, I don't think that went so right?
I have to tell you, I felt confident in the evidence, the law, and the facts all the way through. The only thing I worried about was, did we pick the right jury? Did we pick individuals who are going to look at the facts, the law, and the evidence without using any bias or racial prejudice to basically nullify these young men's actions? And for African-American males, that's been something that's happened to us for far too long. That's what happened in the Emmett Till case. They knew they were guilty, but because they had the power to say no, to do juror nullification, that's what they did. But I have confidence in our American citizens that we're past that the exception is no longer doing the right thing, but that we want to do the right thing as a general rule now. And so we just focused on framing this case in a right versus wrong situation and asked them to say, let's do what's right here and always. And that's what they did. They came back and said these men were guilty. And we knew from the get-go that they were. And I'm just so thankful that we have people who are willing to stand up and do what's right. And I think that's critical in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, you know, quite honestly, I wasn't sure what was going to happen until the jury verdicts were announced. But I knew this, that we had to bring the case. We knew that there was a risk of losing, but we knew we could not bring the case. So we brought it, and I viewed that as us doing our job. Now, talk about video when there's an exoneration. I think Rodney King's case might be the biggest example of that. So 58 smashes on that man's body that way. It just seemed impossible that anybody would say he was not brutally assaulted. And yet we know that Simi Valley jury acquitted those guys. And by the way, in the federal case, I believe Stacey Coons and Lawrence Powell were convicted. The other ones, maybe they weren't, as my memory serves. And so, I mean, and then the guy, you know, Jason Van Dyke, who killed Laquan McDonald, was convicted, but it took 4 years, and the video was sat on for a long time. And if, you know, you never know what would have happened under different circumstances, even though the video they knew was explosive, which is why they didn't release it, if you recall that case. And then, of course, in South Carolina, we all saw Walter Scott. We saw the officer get in a marksman stance and unload that clip on that man in the back. You know, so, and of course, we saw Eric Garner get choked out and to death like that. So, I mean, the video doesn't always get you there, but that's why I believe, in terms of technique, what does your case look like without the video, and do the best you can, and then add in the video, and then it fills in the gaps, right? Because, you know, I think that, you know, so like recently we did this Kim Potter case, and video was indispensable there, you know, including not only the shooting incident, but her reaction afterwards. So it's important, but again, I think that people tend to resolve doubts in favor of the police. I'm not sure that's a bad thing, because we do ask them to protect us, and we do ask them to do a difficult job. But just because you resolve doubts in favor of them doesn't mean that you resolve all doubts. It doesn't mean that they get the benefit of viewing, you know, thinking that your eyes are tricking you and playing tricks on you. It means that you look at it objectively, calmly, and let the facts speak for themselves.
So I think your responses really also, in so many ways, go to the notion of the impact of the jury. Jury selection is a critical factor. And in the Derek Chauvin case, 6 of the 15 jurors and alternates identified as Black or multiracial, whereas in the Ahmaud Arbery case, only 1 of the jurors was an individual of African descent.
Right.
I think that I would say that there is no question that the racial makeup of the jury does, in my opinion, make a difference. And when individuals of color, Black and brown individuals, are eliminated from the jury pool, I think that justice may have the tendency to suffer, no matter the race of the victim or the defendant. If you could both talk a little bit about the jury selection process, but even beyond that, reforms that we could be considering at the state level that might really help to level the playing field, not only for prospective jurors, but also for defendants in cases.
Do you want to talk about who's going first?
Just jump in.
Well, let me just say, obviously, we need a diverse jury. We need a jury that reflects the community. We need to make sure that when jury pools are not representative of the community, that we challenge them. You know, historically, it was, I mean, if I may be very candid, it was prosecutors who were, you know, known to exclude Black jurors from jury pools. Some of you all may remember the Curtis Flowers case that recently went up to the Supreme Court. There was a man who was tried 6 times in Mississippi. The real reason that he ended up winning eventually is that the Black jurors were just sequentially excluded year after year, time after time. And so that's an extreme case. But I think that prosecutors have just as much interest in having a diverse jury as anyone, because we are ministers of justice and we are expected to be fair. And again, you know, it's not our job really to convict people. It's our job to represent the community and be ministers of justice and seek a fair outcome. As a prosecutor, you have to give over evidence that exonerates the defendant. You have to, you know, disclose information to the defendant that might be to the defendant's advantage. And there's all kinds of rules that we have to follow that the defense counsel doesn't have to follow. And yet it's fair to do so because it's us who have the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And it doesn't benefit the public to convict innocent people. So it's a good idea to ask the prosecution to carry the extra burden. And I think that goes right along with jury selection as well. One thing was interesting in our case, when the defense was engaging in what I believe was racially biased jury exclusion, you know, there's an important case that your audience might want to know about called Batson versus Kentucky. And usually that the defense is saying, hey, you got to give a race neutral reason why you excluded that person. We found ourselves making challenging their decisions, you know, when they were trying to exclude Black jurors, which is a bit of a reversal, but I said it really should not be a reversal. I mean, a fair jury is in everybody's interest. We don't want to convict people unfairly. If you deprive somebody of their liberty, which is a core value in American society, then there better be a really good reason for it. And it needs to be fair and procedurally correct. So, you know, I believe that, you know, it's a good idea for every civic organization across America to make sure that the jury pool is representative, is fair, that the inputs for who gets selected are fair. And I think that in our churches and our fraternities and sororities and our lodges and every kind of organization in the Black community, the message must be, don't try to get out of jury service. That's somebody's life on the line. And whether you acquit or convict or can't or hung, it's not fair without you. And just remember, so often when they would exclude Black folks from voting rolls, they would also exclude them from jury service. Mm-hmm. And so historically, you know, in order for us to have a truly representative multiracial democracy, we've got to have Black people on the jury as well. So Black jurors matter, put it like that.
And Tariq, Keith is so right. One of the most important things as the criminal justice system is concerned is the role of the juror, whether it be in a jury trial or whether it be as a grand juror who's reading and looking at indicting for somebody. People don't understand that those decisions really should be made by the community. And that's what jurors are. They're the community's representatives of what's right and wrong in their community. And the juror should be a reflection of what that community is. And when you start excluding jurors because of the race or any biases that you may have, you are really doing a disservice to that community. And whether it be the prosecution or whether it be the defense, we have to really take a look at our you know, lawyers have a bad mentality. We have a win at all cost mentality. And as a prosecutor, that's not your role. You're not there to win at all costs. You're there to be a minister of justice, just like the Attorney General said. Today's role of the juror is even more important and more critical now because of the advent of social media and the access to information. One of the things that we did when we were doing our jury selection is every single juror, we pulled them up on social media to see what kind of posts they were making, see what kind of attitudes they had, what kind of organizations they were had. And we did that not necessarily to exclude them, but to make sure that we were getting a fair juror for both sides, because we wanted the trial to be a fair trial for the defendants as well as for the prosecution. And so we looked at those things. We wanted to know if you had a bias against Black Lives Matter, or if you were a part of a white supremacy organization. We looked at those things to make sure that we were getting 12 people and the 4 alternates, to make sure that they could have an open mind and see the case for the facts and the evidence that it was going to be presented for them, and not have some kind of prior bias that was going to affect the way they look at things. Because for all of us, we all have biases. And for America, the sad part about it is a lot of the labels that we place on people are labels that have connotations that come with them, and we associate those labels with those connotations, and we assume things about people that don't actually exist. And when we do that, we really put ourselves at a disadvantage when it comes to the criminal justice system. So those are one of the things that we paid attention to. For me, when you select a jury that is obviously biased for a defendant, you're normally going to get an acquittal. And for the prosecutor, the problem with that is we only get one bite of the apple. That means if that person gets acquitted, we can never try them again. Where on the defense side, if they get found guilty, they can do numerous appeals in order to get their conviction overturned. So for a prosecutor, it's very important that we have a good jurors, and make sure that they're not going to be biased one way or the other, because we want to do it right. And what the Attorney General was saying about the Batson, what we call a Batson challenge, we actually did a Batson challenge in our case, because out of our final panel, we had 12 Black jurors that were eligible to be on our jury panel. Out of those 12, they struck 11 of them. And quite frankly, I was actually surprised that we were able to get one of them on the juror. And our judge even said in court, I feel that these strikes are racially based, but because you gave a race neutral reason, I can't do anything about it. I think the law should be applied where if the judge feels and the evidence shows that that was the case, that he should be able to seat some of those jurors. Because for us, it's been something that's always happened in the past, whether it was the prosecution doing it or whether it was a white defense team doing it, trying to make sure that they had a white jury. We have to fix that. We have to fix it, because otherwise the criminal justice system is not going to be what it should be. It should be a reflection of the community, as the Attorney General said.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I'm going to stay with you for just a minute, because my next question is really very specific to the Ahmaud Arbery case. So I don't think, and I think you mentioned this earlier, that you were not going to make this case about race. However, it felt like at every turn, the defense was making the case about race. The race card was played time and time and time again. Can you talk just a little bit about how you sort of buttressed yourself to be able to sort of refute that and not get brought into it? Because it would have been very easy to have leaned into all of the stuff that they were doing with regard to race, but you didn't take the bait. So let's talk about that.
The defense wanted to use race in order to capitalize on the racial makeup of the jury. They wanted to attempt to make this trial a black versus white, and us against them, and attempt to use the fear of minorities as a basis for justification of the actions of the defendants. They wanted to capitalize on what they thought were the attitudes and the assumptions of the community of Glenn County. They wanted to exploit racial stereotypes. They wanted the community to think he was a thug and he was not worthy of justice. They wanted to dehumanize Ahmaud. And it's shameful because it not only happened here, but in almost every trial where there's a minority victim, they face the same problems for the prosecution. The defense will try everything they can to put that victim on trial, to make it seem like they deserve to be killed, they don't deserve justice. These, you know, I had a lot of respect for these lawyers until we actually started the trial. And to see the things that they were trying to get through to the jury, especially Mrs. Hoag's comment on her closing argument about his toenails. You know, it was strictly designed to initiate fear and dehumanize this young man, to make it like his life didn't matter. And that's a battle that we have constantly faced as African Americans, as prosecutors trying to defend people of color when they are the victims in a case. And for us, we knew based on our jury selection who our jurors were. We made a point to make sure that we didn't get any old Glenn County folks who had only been in Glenn County, who had been in Glenn County for their entire life. We wanted people who had been in there 5 years or less, so we would understand that they knew and thought different than what we would say the old standard there. And we deliberately did that to make sure that those attitudes, those racial biases would be eliminated from the jury. So that way they would not listen to that message, because I firmly believe the rule in our country is that most people are not racist. The exception is the racism, and that's what we wanted to focus on and make sure that we didn't bring that into the case, because we didn't want to make it an us against them battle.
Thank you for that. We're getting close to the end of our time, and I could go on and on and on with y'all about some of my own personal questions and observations about the cases. But let me just pose this question as we get ready to close out. The true measure of justice is not whether there were convictions or acquittals in either case, but really whether or not there was accountability. And A.G. Ellison, as I was doing some research, I ran across a quote from you that I'd like to read. Accountability is the first step towards justice. So the Floyd and Arbery cases, I think, really call us to reflect on the extent to which vigilante justice is protected by state law, and conversely, whether police use of force is tolerated, defended, or somehow otherwise dismissed, which very easily could have happened in the George Floyd case. So as we close out today's conversation, I'd like to ask both of you just to share your thoughts on what justice is, what it should look like, and based on your experience, where we go from here. And I think I will start on this one with D.A. Broady, and then we'll close out with you, A.G. Ellison.
I think what Attorney General Ellison said was right. It starts with accountability. And that accountability does not just start at the police officer. It flows to the district attorney, it flows to the attorney general, it flows to the governor. Because the one thing about a police officer, he can be as rogue and bad as he wants to. But in order for him to do that, he has to have the support of those in charge. One of the first things I did as the district attorney is I made the rounds of all the police chiefs. And I asked the police chiefs, I said, I need your SOPs, your standard operating procedures for your use of force. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if you go outside those standard procedures, I'm going to prosecute you. If you are within those procedures, I can protect you. Because I don't want rogue police officers. They don't want rogue police officers. We have to hold people accountable for their actions. We have to stop over-policing minority communities. We have to take the opportunity to say, how do I restore these nonviolent offenders to our community? because the truth of the matter, what we've done in the past has not worked. When we continue to saddle someone who's a nonviolent offender with charges that causes them not to be able to get a job, not to be able to get a home, not to be able to take care of their family, eventually they are going to do what they need to do to survive. That's in all of us. We're going to do what we need to do to survive. And if you tell a person that they can't get a job, that they can't live somewhere, eventually they're going to start robbing people to get the money they need to take care of themselves, to take care of their family. That robbing escalates to aggravated assault. Aggravated assault escalates to murder. And that makes our community less safe. So what we have to do as a community, we have to say, okay, how do we fix these individuals? How do we address the trauma that has brought them to the point where they are? And my research has shown me that almost every single person who is convicted of murder, somewhere along the line, started in the criminal justice system as someone with substance abuse. And as a community, we didn't do what we needed to do to fix that individual so they did not become that murderer. That's our fault. That's accountability. That's us taking responsibility for each and every member of our society. We have to do something about equity and equitable opportunities for each and every citizen in our community. We can't expect a kid that goes to school, comes home, mama has to work 2 jobs because she could only get a minimum wage job, and now this kid has no supervision. If he can't find love at home, you know what he's going to do? He's going to find it with the gang members, and they're going to get him to do things that he shouldn't be doing. Why? Because he needs that love. If we're not providing it, he will find it, she will find it. And those are things that we need to think about when we think about the criminal justice system. What are we doing to address the trauma that people go to? And when people are a victim of the criminal justice system, what are we doing to address the trauma that they go through to make sure that they come back to the community whole? These are things that we need to understand, that as a country, we have to take a different approach, especially for our communities of color, because for so long, they have been targeted and used in such a way that, you know, as a people, the African-American people, the people of color, we are 400 years behind because of all the things that we've gone through. So for when you see somebody like Attorney General Ellison or myself, there's a lot that we've gone through to get to the point where we are. Our families have gone through to get to the point where we are. But a lot of folks still need to catch up, and we need to do everything we can to help them catch up. Justice means doing right by people. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want to do harm to someone, if you want to hurt people, I want to throw you under the jail, because that's how I make my community safe. But if you're a nonviolent offender, I want to do what I can to restore you back to the community so you can be productive and never become that violent offender. That's what justice is to me.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, DA Broady, thanks for that and everything else you say and everything else you've done. You did a great service to our country. Again, it's not a surprise. You were a soldier in the Army, and now you're a soldier for justice, and it's an honor to be with you. And so let me just say, justice really looks like full participation in the society that we help to build. Full participation in voting, in juries, full participation in this economy. Quite honestly, when George Floyd got in all this mess was because somebody thought he had a fake 20. And to this very second, I can say there's nobody who knows the case better than me. There's not one shred of evidence to prove that he knew the 20 was fake even. And so he died because of that. Justice is where we can constantly expect equal fair treatment, and where people can expect to walk into a court system and be listened to, or how about this, where the presumption of innocence resides with all defendants and not the presumption of guilt. I can tell you that Derek Chauvin got the presumption of innocence. We had to prove he was guilty. And yet so many people walk into the court where that's not true. Justice is also, I think I'll agree with DA Broady, justice is second chances for people who deserve them. There are some people who do things so outrageous that, I'm sorry, but But justice is also that redemption, restoring. Justice is victims being heard, listened to, Black victims not being treated like defendants, but actually people who have suffered a grievous loss and deserve our compassion. So I think that I'm really grateful that we had this conversation, and I would just ask us as we all go forward to think of things that we can do to build greater justice, to make sure that the systems are accountable, that they're inclusive, and that we put, this is one of our top agenda items, that we relentlessly pursue justice no matter what, no matter where. And I'm just honored to be with y'all this afternoon, and I thank you for having me.
Well, as I've already said, we could go on and on and on, but I am absolutely thrilled to have been able to welcome both of you to Conversations in Color. This has been not only a rich conversation, but one that's been equally thought-provoking and actionable. So when I think about our conversation today, I'm going to think about what full participation is and what building greater systems of justice looks like, and the role that I personally can play in leveling the playing field for everyone when it comes to the criminal justice system, even those people that need those second chances. So I just want to end by thanking both of you for joining us today. Thank you for saying yes to Conversations in Color, and just thank you for your service. Your service has been measured by the impact of the work that you've been doing, not only previous, but the work that you will continue to do moving forward. So thank you both for joining us. Just as a note to our listeners, our April conversation will feature Dr. Michael Lomax, President of the United Negro College Fund, and Dr. Harry Williams, President and CEO of the Thurgood Marshall Fund. And the topic for our April conversation will be HBCUs, the Black Talent Pipeline. This has been the January version of Conversations in Color. Thanks for joining us. Thank you again to AG Keith Ellison and DA Flynn Broady. Thanks everybody for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Happy Black History Month as well. Take care. Bye-bye.